Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak Thunder, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast. I am your host, Molch-R. We're back on schedule. Wonderful. On this episode, we're talking to Dave Taylor, who's the artist on Megatropolis, the amazing Elseworlds-style series, which is all Art Deco and noir, which has been running in the magazine. Got its first collection this month in paperback and sold out hardcover. This series, written by Kenneth Niemand, it's just a great exploration of the ideas behind Judge Dredd, but looking at it through a bit of a prism. So you have the recognisable characters like Rico, America, Jarra, but in a very different setting. There's influences in there of like Fritz Lang's Metropolis movie from the 1920s, all inspired by a great kind of Art Deco bike that Ken saw online, I think it was. Do check out our interview with Ken from, was it this year or last year? What is time anymore? Where he talks a little bit about his influences on Megatropolis. But it was great to be able to sit down with Dave and chat, because it's been well over a decade since he and I had a proper chat. I last spoke to him for a piece in the magazine. To see what he's been up to, how his style has evolved for this series, not just in kind of initial stages, but also as it's gone on, and really to get a sense of what the art brings to a project like this, when the aesthetic is so integral to the very idea of it. So it was wonderful to be able to chat to him. This is an audio only presentation since Dave was on the phone. So we'll put up some images as we go along. So those of you watching on YouTube have something to look at. But those of you who are listening on the podcast app shouldn't notice any difference. So we'll crack on with that, I think. So thank you very much indeed for all the feedback from last time. Sorry about the sound quality. Unfortunately, we had lots of problems with microphones and earphones and all sorts. So we did our best, but appreciate that for some people, you weren't quite able to follow along at home. Hopefully this won't be a problem this week. So without much further ado, Dave Taylor. Well, it's fantastic to welcome Dave Taylor to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. How you doing, Dave?
I'm very well, Mike. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. So as we said just off mic just a moment ago, it has been a while since we last chatted, interviewed you for the magazine back in 2007.
Right.
But the reason I wanted to talk to you is because of the release of Megatropolis, which is the series that you've done with Kenneth Niemand.
The beginning of the series.
The beginning of the series, absolutely.
The beginning of the series only, yes.
Obvious question to begin with is how did you come to be involved in doing Megatropolis?
Being in the right place at the right time, I guess. Ken came up with the idea, and I think, most of us have heard the story of him seeing I can't remember the name of the motorbike, but it was a beautifully designed late 20s design, and it just took his imagination off, and the whole Megatropolis thing fell into place for him. And I think because I'd done Batman Death by Design with Chip Kidd a few years back, 2012, and that was intensive drawing of cities, or Gotham in this case. It's kind of like if you're an editor and you're given a script that demands a certain approach or a certain skill set, if there's lots of buildings in it, for instance, in this case, you're not going to go to somebody that likes drawing trees a lot. And I'd sort of proven that, trees weren't my thing, that maybe buildings were. Nothing against trees, sorry, but, So it was. I think it was that, and of course Matt had worked with me before, and we'd got on well, and I can only presume it was mostly because of Death by Design.
Because you'd done a fair bit of Dredd and Anderson before that, and it certainly the kind of vistas of Mega City 1 that you were doing had a very kind of, I don't know how to describe it, kind of quite organic. Like some of your city blocks always, it kind of looked like polyps almost, you know?
Yeah. Yes, I saw them very much. A good explanation of that is that that's how I saw the city growing, because it's like it grows organically when there's a need for extra room on a building, extra space. You know, say they add a Boeing room or something, then it'll grow upwards or outwards, and just to suit that particular purpose. And so they'll grow like you say, like, you know, these organic things. And I felt I wanted to have like a set understanding of how the city grew based on what I loved I'd seen from the masters before. You know, from McMahon and Esquire and all those brilliant designers, and taking in Ron Smith stuff that was completely different, that was more, you know, geometric but still worked. And he did some, you know, he mixed lots of designs, and I think that was something that sort of sparked my imagination of how the city should look, that maybe it's not just one designer to begin with, but over time it's kind of accepted that the AI is better at designing Mega City 1 than human designers, and that it's grown because of, you know, because of that. If that makes any sense.
No. Well, absolutely, because it's that original vision that Esquire had for Mega City 1. I think he described it as like blooms or mushrooms or something like that. You know, where as you say, when you have technology that can basically build anything you want, then buildings become incredibly functional. You know,
absolutely,
because you build for exactly what you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I was seeing it. Absolutely, yeah.
And with something like Megatropolis, it's got a very specific aesthetic. Was this something that you had that when you know, Matt and Ken came to you and said, we want you to do this, that was there in the original pitch, that this was this Art Deco kind of noir world? Absolutely,
yeah. You know, it was very clear in the breakdown that Ken gave me that there was, you know, he gave me a flavour of what he was imagining it to be, and that's always really useful when, you know, because I'm not going to dismiss how a writer imagines it as he's writing it. You know, what's in his mind. If he can get that across to the artist, that shouldn't be ignored. So it was clear that it was, you know, Fritz Lang's Metropolis mixed with, I don't know, Dick Tracy, Batman, you know, Gotham, that kind of, that the Art Deco side of all that's been established before, and just to play around with it. And I just felt that depending on what was needed in the script, what I could show was based on those things and what I'd done before with Mega City 1, and trying to incorporate similar feelings. You know, so it's not just a Batman Gotham. It's not just a Metropolis. It's linked directly to Mega City 1 in its design.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, because obviously, you know, you've name checked a lot of influences there, but is it? Well, I'll ask you this rather than try and explain it myself. What are those qualities that for you distinguish Mega City 1? You know, we've talked about the kind of functionality of it,
Yeah.
What are those qualities that distinguish it from, say, if you're working on Batman or you're looking at Dick Tracy or something like that?
Right.
What's unique about Mega City 1 that you were able to go, well, actually, this is something different to all that's gone before it?
Yeah. The approach to Mega City 1 I've always had is to try and make it a bit future shock. That you're not really sure what you're looking at all the time. There's bits of technology there that makes no sense at all, and the average reader will skip over things like that, but the more attentive one will see things that they're just, what is that? What is that doing there?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, because if we were transported 122 years, whatever it is, into the future, there's going to be shit that we're not going to know what the hell it does, what it's for, why it's there. And I wanted to bring that into Megatropolis. I don't know whether I did it, but I think there are sort of things in the backgrounds and lighting things that are trying to be weird and strange and unfamiliar. Which, because it's science fiction, I think those things have to be in there. You have to have a sense of not really belonging there. You're just visiting,
I mean, that's an interesting word that you just used, the kind of unfamiliar, because, of course, this is a world that we're meant to know, but also at the same time not know. It's riffing off characters that exist, a world that exists, but seeing them through a prism. I know, Ken has previously mentioned how he dealt with in the script, balancing those two aspects, making it recognizable enough that it's recognizable, but also just a little bit off kilter, so it's something different.
Absolutely.
How did you bring that about in the art? Designing Dredd was, the major thing, wasn't it? He had to be, or it, or they, had to be instantly recognizable for storytelling purposes. Because the first time we see him, we only see a glimpse of him, but even that glimpse had to be somehow recognizable. So, little things like that, that's where it all everything sort of folded down from there. From once I'd got Dredd looking how I felt he would look in that universe, with the Art Deco design qualities and such, then, everything else was based from that point. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, because
does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned Art Deco there, because it's one of those things that as soon as I saw the initial pages that came in for Megatropolis when it was being published in the magazine, it made perfect sense. Because you'd done Batman by design, which was gorgeous, but even before then, I would have said that Art Deco was something that was lodged in your style. It was a fundamental part of your style. Was that a conscious thing?
No.
Am I seeing something that isn't necessarily there?
Well, no, you might be seeing something that is there, that's subconscious. I've never, I'm totally frank, I've never considered Art Deco as being a particularly favourite design trope to me. It's a bit boring, really. Basically, it's a series of set rules to corners of buildings and corners of architraves and window frames and things like that. They're curved, and there's often just 3 curves. And if you stick to those rules, that's basically it. Compare that to Art Nouveau, which is really much closer to my heart. It's organic. Everything's based on the way trees and plants grow, and so Deco's completely different. But I think what you're possibly seeing is the amount of like strict architectural drawing that I've forced myself to learn, and to when I was doing Batman, with Alan Grant, Shadow of the Bat, I'm drawing a lot of Gotham, and Gotham is a set thing. You can add to it, but working for DC was very different to 2000 AD, where you've got more scope for designing and bringing new things in. DC are very set. Well, were when I was working for them, very set. They've got their Bible, they've got the design Bible that they send you, which I don't know whether my Arkham Asylum's still in it. I must ask somebody one day, because I ended up designing Arkham Asylum, which everybody was sent, and this is how it looks, and so I guess it's just that. Because I've got a very sort of natural, not a straight line method of drawing. If I try to draw a straight line, it's very curvy. I've got a curvy way of drawing, and so to draw architecture, I really have to force myself to use a ruler and be strict about it. And I think it's probably that strictness that's coming across to you.
Well, I guess this is probably a good time as any, still fairly on in our chat, to talk about the influence of Jean Giraud, the Mobius, who you knew and worked with, and the kind of embedding of things like Art Deco, Art Nouveau, that very European style of comics in his style, which is obviously a major influence on you. Is that something that you feel has kind of marked out your work? Has it been the dominant influence, or is it that you were just coming from similar points of view? Because there's obviously a reason why he wanted to work with you. Right.
Well, it started because the reason I got into Mobius's work is because I'd developed my own style that had very similar rules to it. Based on my love when I was growing up, the first comics I was into predominantly, I think Tintin really stood out as being special. The way those books were published, it was all one big long story that you could spend hours reading, and the technique, the quality of the technique was, very draftsman orientated, and because my dad was a draftsman. And so that was always appealing to me. And so this style I'd developed was kind of very freeform and weird, and, coming out of art school in the 70s, late 70s, you can imagine what they might have been like. And, and I was sort of influenced by, 2000 AD was a massive influence at that age. But lots of other stuff, always had a very eclectic taste and whatever it could get hold of, and it was just that quality that he saw in my work, I think, that appealed to him. That sort of, I don't really know how to describe it. Just another worldly kind of, not drawing superheroes, not drawing monsters or whatever. It was kind of weird sci-fi, purely out of your imagination. And that's what appealed to me about his work. He had this amazing technical ability, but what he was drawing was just weird and strange and unique,
Yeah, one of the things that always struck me about his work and is reflected in yours is the placing of the character within an environment. You get some artists who almost purely focus on the character, and the background is kind of it's just background is it's almost incidental,
secondary. Yeah.
Whereas from your superhero work, from your 2000 AD work, from the other work that you've done, the two seem to be as important as each other. You're very careful to place the character within their environment in a meaningful way, that it isn't just background detail.
That's interesting to hear. Okay, well, that's purely from the very early days of trying to learn to draw comics. and maybe it was partly the how to draw comics the Marvel way. Picked up things from reading that about background and that, and Paul Neary. When I started at Marvel UK, the boss Paul Neary, who was a fantastic artist in his own right, gave some great advice. One of which, well, actually, was it great advice? I don't know. But he said, "Oh, you're too old for comics." I was 26 at the time. He said, "Oh, you're too old for getting into comics." And I thought that was a really weird thing to say because he was employing me. Yet, because I was like, what do you mean by that? It was kind of, well, you're not going to have a long career because you've started so late, and you've got a lot of catching up to do, I think he was saying. Compared to like the likes of Liam Sharp, who had started, I don't know, I think he'd started drawing big muscly monsters and stuff in his crib. He was I think when he was 16 he was ready to draw comics professionally. Or at 17 I think maybe when he started, I don't know. And I was like nearly 10 years older than that, and he wasn't used to getting older guys in. I think when he'd seen my stuff, he just presumed I was as young as those guys. I wandered off. But what was the... Oh, yeah, the advice was basically to remember to keep reminding the audience where these characters are doing their thing. If it's mostly talking heads, it's going to get really boring. Just, if you can't... You're used to watching it on TV. You'll watch a whole 10-minute scene of people just talking at each other. And very occasionally the camera will pull back to remind you where you are. But in comics, it's essential that the reader knows where these people are. And so I guess that's the main thing. And, I just love drawing backgrounds and designing all that kind of secondary stuff. It's fun. To establish the characters within their setting, enhances the characters, enhances the story.
Because when you've got a thing like Batman Death by Design, that for me kind of so perfectly sums up the qualities of your artwork that it feels designed. And it was really interesting a moment ago to hear you talk about the rules. The Art Deco has a certain set of rules. Your style has a certain set of rules. And I don't hear many artists refer to their style as a set of rules that they have. It's really, it's much more about, feel and all this, that and the other. But it's interesting that you think about it in those terms, that there are rules that you follow, that you have laid down,
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a form of containment because that otherwise I'd be drawing things that people wouldn't like because it would be too weird or unacceptable. It wouldn't be recognizable. There have to be. I think it was drummed into me when I was starting to learn to draw comics because I wasn't taught one-to-one by any comic book artist or anything. It was all just picking up things as I went along. And it just, it was just seemed so important to get rules set that I could follow that would help me, towards that goal of becoming a professional artist. It kind of made sense because my stuff before those rules were applied, was very sort of free form. And you can take it or leave it. Some people would love it because it was, strange and weird and maybe didn't have rules. And but yeah, no, it's my natural way of drawing is very free form. So I have to apply rules to contain it. I think that makes sense.
Well, let's come back to talk about Megatropolis proper for a moment, because there's the clear visual influence is Fritz Lang's Metropolis movie from the 1920s?
27, 26, something like that.
Maybe
earlier.
Late 20s.
Yeah.
I'm interested as to how that may have been an influence, whether you sat down and watched it, looked at stills, whether it was something as conscious as that, or it was just in the background in your mind when you were drawing the strip.
Yeah, I didn't watch it again. I'd watched it maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago, and I enjoyed a lot of it, but overall I found it a bit difficult. It didn't have enough explosions in it or car chases for me, or jokes. So when it came to reading Ken's script, it was a matter of I did do some photo reference, because when I did Death by Design, for instance, I spent 4 months just doing research and learning to draw in a 30s style, completely trying to change my approach to drawing. And I did a similar thing with this, but not as in-depth, because all that research I'd done for Batman applied to Megatropolis. I had all these files full of, just skyscrapers in Chicago and New York and wherever. So all that reference was already there. I could use that again. And the Metropolis flavor, I remembered the film very clearly. And a bit of photo reference just sparked those memories, and that was that, really. I didn't want it to be too. I didn't want anything to slip in that wasn't necessary. I didn't want to get into it too much for it to be too much of an influence. The name itself of the book is clearly sets the tone, and so I felt I didn't really need to do that much more of putting those influences into it visually. Yeah, because
it's one of those things that Metropolis is often cited as a major sci-fi landmark and an influence on lots of different genres and mediums. Yet direct reference to it seems to be few and far between, because it is such a strong look, it places it so clearly in that kind of sci-fi futurist moment between the wars, that to reference it directly, you've kind of got to lean into it. You can't just do it accidentally or half-heartedly.
No.
You've got to go for it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I didn't really want to be to copy things from the film, like the lighting or those things were sort of subtly there in the back of my mind. If the time came in the script to put something like that in, those influences would be there as whispers in the back of my mind, but still trying to make it original and unique and special, because it was Mega City 1. It's not Metropolis. Yeah.
And just going back to the point that we were talking about a while ago about that kind of familiar, unfamiliar aspect. Obviously, the lead character is Rico. You've got America Jarra in there. Various other very obvious links to the Dredd world. When you're designing characters like that, how much do you lean into what has gone before to make them recognizable, or is that something that you feel that the script should do? Because I'm just in my mind. I'm screaming chin when you have the distinction of being one of the few artists who has drawn a Dredd without a helmet on,
Yes. I honestly thought I was going to get hate mail for that, but nothing's come through yet. Maybe the book hasn't been out long enough.
Yeah, but it's how what was your conscious thought when putting those characters together about how they would look?
Well, certainly with Joe Rico, it was terror. I mean, I did get quite nervous about and was uncomfortable, I think, about being that guy that takes his helmet off.
Right.
I didn't want to be that guy. It was an uncomfortable feeling, and then I thought, no, I've got to do it. So let's just embrace it. And this is a fantastic opportunity for a fanboy to get to draw Dredd's face, or get to imagine what the guy might look like. Was a phenomenal experience. I mean, I've been reading it from 1977, from the first prog, and okay, there were gaps in the 90s, like most people my age, but it was, the guy's an icon, and to get to draw his or to imagine his face was quite a trip. And then because he, again, with as I said, with Dredd, he was where I started. Once I got Dredd sort of right, I could start using that as a flavour for the rest of the city and everything else. And so when I got Rico right in my head, then I thought, okay, well, if obviously I've kept the chin, I've kept the sulk, the mouth. So it's obvious that we're talking about a similar character. If not talking about Judge Dredd from Mega City 1, we're talking about part of his essence trapped in this new character. And so visually, I had to have that, for the reader to latch onto. And then I think Hershey was the second character I drew, because she's on the first page. And I don't know if you noticed, she changes quite a lot from that first image you see her on the first opening double-page spread, to when you see her at the pyramid later on, because I think I was going a bit too stylized right at the beginning, a bit too Dick Tracy cartoony. I was kind of wanting to play around with that. But I think bottled out of it. I think the way my natural style of drawing kind of won through, and it ended up looking the way it was, a bit more realistic. And so, when I established Hershey, because they're all definitely based on how we know them. Every single one of them, Magruder, everybody, they were all, and Cal. I couldn't quite get him right to begin with, because he's so caricatured in the original books. I didn't want to it just felt uncomfortable to sort of copy that or emulate that. So he kind of came out looking a bit more realistic and a bit more human than I might have drawn him. But yeah, a really strange experience to redesign these iconic characters.
It's always one of those things I dwell on when I see an older character returned by a different artist, is how, probably with it, iconic those character designs actually are, that we can recognize them not just by a different hand, but in a completely different setting. So you can look at Megatropolis without looking at the word balloons, and you can still pretty much guess who is who. The
right.
designs were so simple, and you can boil it down to where there's a brunette woman and with a bob.
I can't who that is.
And there's the Hispanic character, and there's Dredd there. But it's just, it's so fascinating that after all these years, you can just transplant them to a completely different setting, and they work just as well. Well,
hopefully, yeah. The response I've had has been very good, and I think it's sold well. Maybe you could confirm that.
I can confirm that it has sold well. Well, because the special edition, the hardcover, sold out pretty snappily, which was nice to see. One of those books, because we haven't done much in the way of Elseworlds stuff, alternative takes. And there's So there's not much of a spectrum to analyze. You know, you go from like the Alternity special, which was in the 1990s,
right.
which had varying degrees of success. But with this, I guess this is a question for you, really. What do you think are the qualities of the success of this? Not necessarily in terms of sales, but in terms of the success of the kind of adaptation of this world. You know, the success for you of how it turned out.
I absolutely love it. I'm delighted with it because when I first read the script, I think I've said a few times that it was just, why has nobody thought of this? This is brilliant. This is genius. You know, it's just one of those things that, you know, you think, why has nobody thought of this before? It's brilliant. It's great. So I knew I had to, it was a special project, and that always inspires me to do my absolute best and become a better artist while I'm working on it. And so that, you know, that gives it a quality where it's, if I think it's special, maybe that'll come across to the reader, you know? And it's a very unique thing, and there's lots of it that I'd love to redraw, but I think all artists would probably feel the same. But I think it's worked really well. I think Ken just did all the groundwork for me to make it look pretty, and I think we did. I think we're a good team for it. Yeah.
Coming back to what you mentioned a moment ago about how early on you were leaning much more into the kind of Dick Tracy, slightly caricatured look. Two questions here, I guess. Number one, why did that change? And number two, how does a project of something of this length? Because the first series is a standalone graphic novel of it in its own right. How much did the kind of stresses and strains of a project like this consciously and unconsciously influence you as you go along?
Oh, it definitely does. And if there was less pressure on all sides, I may have spent longer designing the characters and found a way of making them more caricature. Because I had lots of fun when I was younger drawing caricatures of people, and I used to get into trouble at school caricaturing the teachers. It's something that fascinates me, and I love a really good caricaturist. This sort of, when I first read it, this sort of felt like, because Dick Tracy was mentioned and as an influence, and I thought, I get what Ken's looking for, and if I had more time, I would have been happier with doing more caricatured, making them really kind of weird, pushing it as far as I could, perhaps. But on reflection, now seeing the book completed, I'm glad I didn't. I think it makes it more noir, more fits into a more of a serious world than a cartoony world. You know, I didn't want it to be like a funny cartoon version of Mega City 1, which it could have been if I'd gone too far down that avenue. You know.
I guess that's one of the elements of whether something like this can stand on its own 2 feet. Does it take itself seriously enough and not too seriously at the same time? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because
I felt like, because there's lots in it that is, it just shows a love of the history of 2000 AD and the history of Mega City 1 and Dredd and the characters, and that comes across, and so that there is that playful element to it already within its very being. You know, its existence is a playful thing. So, I felt I could make it, because it's dark, and it's talking about political corruption, which is something that I'm very aware of, and I think a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of. that we're surrounded by corruption, that our world runs on it, basically, as fuel, to some degree, and this reflected that. So I think to make it too cartoony would have been fighting against that, you know.
I mean, you mentioned noir, and the essence of noir is corruption. You know, the kind of Raymond Chandler's and my mind has gone blank for. And then, you know, that kind of 1940s noir, where it was all about the hard-boiled detectives who private eyes who you know they stand against the backdrop of graft and corruption and murder, and they're meant to be the character that it rubs off on a little bit, but they're not necessarily morally contaminated by it, if you see what I mean. Yeah. So that makes it, noir is perfect for a different take on Judge Dredd, just on that basis. Well,
absolutely.
Alone.
Yeah, it is. That's it. That's all you need, isn't it? Because that's Joe Rico. That's the central character. He's the choir boy in the center of this, surrounded by this mire of corruption, and the city's decaying, and people are getting crazy, and social decay, and he's this light in the center of all this, just like those classic stories. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the stuff that Ken's put in there later on, and there will be a spoiler warning on this for anybody who's not reading Metropolis, so we can talk about the ending of this series.
Right.
You get that confrontation between Rico and between the assassin, and there's the discussion there, which it's really interesting to see. One of the essences of Judge Dredd as a character and as a series explored through a slight abstract, because they talk about the difference between justice and the law, and where Rico stands on that, but then at the very end you get this not grand reset, but you see that even the elimination of the threat, he solved the threat, he's eliminated that threat that he'd been pursuing.
Right.
It's not solve things, he's ultimately limited in what he can do, because he's not succumbing to the kind of moral collapse that led to that assassin operating in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. He's caught in that. That's sort of a classic. It feels so Dredd at the end, so classic Dredd to me at the end, where he's faced with that reality. He's like, well, this is how I roll. This is the law, and you can't fuck with the law. I.e., if you go changing it and manipulating it and saying, oh well, yeah, but this and that, then it breaks down. And he's just this, and he knows he's right, and he's just like Judge Dredd. He's there, unmoved. He can't be moved from that position, despite, as you say, what he's surrounded by. I think the ending was wonderful. I think it worked really well.
One thing I did want to ask about was your color choice on the series, because it's such a strong. Clearly a very deliberate palette that you've employed here.
Right.
Was that something that came out of your initial work on the first episode, or was it something you said, right, this is going to be the color palette for this series?
Oh yeah, right from the beginning. It was what I did on Death by Design. I wanted to have a similar, again, back to the rules. I needed to have a set rule, so I didn't sort of get a bit carried away halfway through the story and lose the flavor of it. Because mood was something I really wanted to capture in it. It was trying to capture, because when I was when I was off sick for a while, I was studying Leonardo da Vinci. I had these amazing books, and I was devouring these books and reading about this, 600-year-old guy. And the way he described painting, he was saying, instead of, it would apply to a colorist these days, I think, on a comic book, you don't color, you light. You don't color things in, you light them. And so that really changed my way of thinking. And, I was thinking, right, it's not, I don't think about what the colors I'm going to use. I want to get a mood. And so that those colors have to reflect that mood. And so that really just described, how I went on from there. The first double page spread of the city that established, although I didn't really, actually, that's quite different to the rest of it, thinking about it. There's a lot of light blue in there, which didn't really come out until later on in the story. But it was a definite, decision to have like a mood board. I collected a couple of paintings with skies and these greys and sort of twilight colours, which I just felt suited the story, which is my job, to tell the story as well as possible.
In terms of moving forwards, obviously there's more to come from you and Kenneth and Megatropolis.
Yeah.
How do you envisage you moving forward as an artist on this? Is it kind of, you've got into a nice groove now, this is, how you like doing this series, or is there going to be an itch that you have to scratch that, there's going to be that voice in your head that goes, actually, let's try something different?
There probably will be. I mean, it all depends on the script. It depends on what I'm asked to do. If things in Megatropolis change and, things become better, which I can't imagine they're going to, then the palette will reflect that. But I think it's going to continue being in a similar palette. But I want them all to look like they're all part of the same series. I think it's going to be a bit weird if it jumps in style. And so, yes, I have established style that I'm comfortable working in for this project. And I can't really see that changing. But again, like I say, it depends on what I'm called to do. I've no idea what's happening, and just again back to the fanboy. It's really exciting knowing that Ken's sitting there, probably as we speak, typing away. And it's not that far away that I'm going to be starting to read it by the looks of it. And it's not just the fanboy thing of what's the story going to be. It's also that sort of the artist, the ever questing artist wanting to learn and to grow. What is he asking me to draw next? So who knows?
Because I kind of wanted to also set Megatropolis in the context of your career, because like I said last time we talked, 2007. You'd come. Well, this is a misleading phrase, but I will explain. You'd come back to 2000 AD.
Yes.
You'd had a career where you had worked for Marvel UK and then made the leap to America without going through the hallowed halls of Fleetway.
Right.
But I believe it was a conversation with Peter Doherty, who sort of said, well, didn't you always want to draw Judge Dredd? And that kind of it gave you a focus at a difficult time in your career, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The lead up to that was that, I'd had from my point of view, a successful career. It was getting better, and I was getting better gigs, and working on Batman, and then the Mobius thing developed, and I worked on a project with him, a couple of projects, and it was all going really well. And then DC offered me another 12 months on Shadow of the Bat. And even though I was working with Alan Grant, which was wonderful, and my relationship with him grew, and it was a joy, it was the artistic side of it. I was forced to have an inker that I didn't know. I was forced to have a colorist I didn't know, and the letterer. There was no control over the artwork, and I was kind of really getting frustrated because Tongue Lash I'd had much more control over, and that had been really successful. So that was something that was, a big problem with DC, and I. When we talked a lot about it, and then this project World's Finest came up, and it was kind of designed to show off my European style, but in the DC universe. So this Batman Superman project started going, and it's cut a very, very long and painful story short. It all fell apart, beginning with them taking 8 months off the schedule on a 200 and something page book. So that was like devastating right from the beginning. I think I'd done 20 pages or something. And I got a phone call saying, things have changed already, and this special project has got 8 months stripped off it, and that it all just collapsed from there on. And so, there was a bad period. There was a divorce at the time, and then I had a double hiatus hernia operation, and it was, things were bad. And I couldn't work physically, I couldn't draw because it was literally painful for years to sit there. And then, I think about 2004, I think it was, somewhere around there, I was speaking to Pete, and because he's absolutely anybody that's met him knows he's a delightful character, absolutely brilliant genius of a guy. And with the clarity that he has, he said, but Judge Dredd is always what you wanted to do, isn't it? We've talked about it in the past. And I said, oh, my God, yeah. I'm now in a position to start again, because I was starting to feel like physically capable of drawing again and mentally capable of doing it again. And Pete was just that kick up the arse. And so I got in touch with Alan, and he was, more than happy to come up with some ideas, and it just flourished from there. It was amazing.
Because as you say, you had this difficult period in your career, because you worked on things like World's Finest, the Batman Superman series. And I remember you talking about how, as you said, with the other Batman stuff, the challenges of scheduling, of keeping up with that constant need to keep working, to keep up with the schedule, because things move forward. Monthly schedules are punishing enough as it is.
On a monthly book, absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned about how, to a greater or lesser extent, it had drained a lot of the pleasure out of what you were doing.
Well, no, I'd got used to the scheduling side of it. It was, it took a while. Zorro, when I worked for Marvel, that was the big challenge. That was the first monthly book I'd done.
Yeah.
And it was a massive struggle, and I learned so much from doing that. And so one side, while I was doing Batman, it was just my regular life. And I was, keeping up to schedule, no problem. And that's why they offered me another 12 issues. And, but then when they offered me this special World's Finest project, they sat down and worked out the schedule, and it's going to take him this long. And it was based on, my ability to draw quickly and get work out. But also thinking about the fact that I was going to be inking it myself. And originally it was going to be coloured by one of Mobius's colourists, Scarlett Smolkowski. She was signed up to do it. But when they stripped 8 months off the schedule, which basically, in half, they decided that wasn't going to be the case, and they had to get another inker and a different colourist, an in-house colourist, and, which killed the project for me. That was that. I can't remember what your question was.
No, it's just about how You'd mentioned back in 2007 how the difficult scheduling had drained an awful lot of the pleasure out of it.
Oh right, yeah. Well, it was the scheduling thing was because of that one World's Finest project. You know, it got to the point where because they'd taken those 8 months off the schedule, I was having to work twice as fast. So by the time I'd got halfway through the series, because it was what do they call it? I don't know, deluxe graphic thing. I don't know. The first issue was 42 pages, and then there were 8 24-page books, and then the last one was another 48 pages or something. And so I'd got halfway through the project, and I was having to do almost 3 pages a day. Wow. And they're expecting me to continue keeping up the quality of how it started at that pace, and it was just it's impossible. You're asking too much. And it got to the point where I said, well, you're going to have to get somebody else in because I'm not doing this anymore. You know, it was just bonkers. You know, I was working every hour I was awake. And, you know, my marriage was decaying and my health was decaying. And they're quite important things to a guy. And, you know, DC at the time, the editorial team, they'd fucked up the project so much because it wasn't just stripping 8 months off it. It was not sending reference to me, and scripts coming in late. And then there's the Carl Kessel, bless him. It was the writer. He thought at the beginning of the project it was a special project, and he got involved because it was going to be fun. And then, as I said, we got halfway through it, and he got sick and tired of it. And when I was getting the scripts, I could tell he was no longer interested. It wasn't his best work, you know. And he was, and they started throwing characters at him, saying, "Oh, can you put these characters in because these characters need a boost." And it got really ugly, you know, really corporate. And, you know, I just couldn't take any more physically and mentally, and I just gave up. But they begged and begged, and well, that sounds pretentious, but they were kind of furious and insisted that I did the rest of the series covers and maybe just layouts. And I said, no. I ended up having to find them a replacement penciler, which happened to be Peter Doherty, which I'll always regret to this day because I shouldn't have put him in that position as a friend. You know, I think he was looking for work at the time. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but you know, my head wasn't working properly at the time. And if I'd had any clarity, I wouldn't have put Pete forward because I was just putting him in the same position as I was trying to escape from, which was, you know, in retrospect, was really unkind. And he helped, you know, he stepped in and he did some great episodes, and then, you know, he couldn't keep up the schedule, and then they had to get somebody else in, and by the end, the last book was just absolute mess. It was bonkers. So that was it for me. I was like, right, I'm not doing anything like that ever again. I don't care how big a special project the publisher tells me it's going to be. You know, if I start if I get a little whiff of anything like that, you know, I'll be off because it's no way to work. It's no way. It's a creative industry, and it's, you know, the creative people. They have to be in the right frame of mind. They can't be forced to be creative. You know, well, a lot of people can. I don't know, but you know, to get the best out of someone, you allow them space and you allow them the ability to do their work, to do their best. And if, you know, you're constantly phoning them up saying, "Oh, you're late. We need this book in for, you know, whatever it is," you know, and it's their problem that is causing those deadline issues, then, you know, it's not going to work, is it?
In terms of how things have changed since, you know, back in 2000.
Oh, sorry, can I just interrupt there? Sorry, I've just realised I've talked about that period of my life without without bad-mouthing anyone. That's quite an achievement, Mike, I have to say.
Well, I mean, if you
didn't drop any bombs on anyone. Wow, shit.
If you want me to lay it up, then by all means let me know, and we can just do a list.
No, let's move on.
All right, okay. Well, like I said, last time we probably chatted was back in 2007.
Yeah.
And what has your career been like since then? Because obviously you did Big Robots with Alan Grant. You subsequently worked with Ian Edgington, and now you're on to working with Kenneth Niemand on Megatropolis. How has that? Quite a sizable. I hadn't realised it was 14 years, but how have things evolved and changed for you since then? Not just in terms of the work that you've had to do, but in terms of how you've been producing it.
Yeah, it's been mostly brilliant, to be honest with you. It's because when I realised I had another opportunity to become a comic book artist again, because there was a large gap. It was like 5 or so years where I was out of the industry, and I'd been told by a number of people that you'd never work in comics again. You've let us down, and and I don't want to use the word scapegoat really, but that's the way I was kind of treated at DC, and that kind of shit sticks, and I didn't want anything to do with any of that, and I realised that. Let's just start again, right? What did I want to do right from the beginning? I just wanted to do science fiction. That's all I love to draw, mostly. Sometimes I can be inspired to do something else, but if I've got a choice, it's to use my imagination and design stuff for a futuristic world. And where better to work than 2000 AD? I was such a fanboy, and I'd sent a couple of pieces. But portfolio pieces, and maybe you can help me with this. I think it was about 1985 or 86, and I spoke to the then Tharg, but I've no idea who it was.
Oh, 85, 86. Off the top of my head, let me have a look. I seem to spend an awful lot of time on podcasts, Googling things.
Right. Well, while you're searching, I remember I was standing in Euston Station, and I phoned them back because I'd sent the artwork in. I was hoping that I'd get invited because I went down to London. I was hoping I'd get invited into the offices and we could talk about what work they were going to throw at me. And I stood in Euston Station and spoke to whoever it was, and it's really annoying. I don't know that.
It's Steve. 85, 86 would have been Steve McManus who was Tharg.
Right. Okay, that's right. Yeah, of course it was. Yes, it was. Yeah, okay. And I spoke to him briefly on the phone at Euston Station, and he said that it was okay, but there were no backgrounds, and it's not going to work for us. And so I kind of went away from that, thinking, okay, well, he said it was too American. He said he looked too American. So I thought, if my work looks too American, maybe I've got a chance of working in the American market, which is, the bigger market. Yeah. There are more comics to choose from to draw. They publish more. Maybe I'll get more work that way. And that's kind of, So my first attempt at getting into 2000 AD was a failure. And so I realized that, wow, I've got this really good opportunity to do it properly this time. And, knowing Alan as I did, and I spoke to him and he was keen, and it was like it suddenly all fell into place. My years of reading those comics and soaking all that information up I've got all these tools I can play with. If somebody throws me a Judge Dredd story, I'll be able to do it easily now. It won't be a struggle like it would have been back in those days, because I've got all this experience now, and I've got that. I had this newfound, face the challenge kind of. It was adventurous for me because I'd come through such a traumatic and awful time, to be reborn into comics. That is great. And I don't want to look back, because I just love working for 2000 AD so much because of my experience with other publishers. Working for Tharg is just an absolute joy. It's that simple. and he gives me all these great scripts to draw, and like I say, it allows me to do what I always wanted to do, which was to draw out from my imagination and use all that fun stuff. Yeah,
it just over the years of doing creative interviews and doing this podcast, that the latitude that artists and writers get to do what they want to do at 2008 seems to be the reason lots of people keep coming back.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm sure they will, because if they go off and find a different publisher that doesn't work that way, they're going to realise how wonderful the ability to have that freedom is. It really is a special thing. It's what I always used to bang on about to people. Why can't publishers just let us get on with it? Even Alan Grant. You'd think a guy like him with his background working for DC on Batman, you'd think they'd just let him get on with it. But they were constantly saying, "Oh, can you put this character in? This character needs support. Oh, can you write a couple of Robin stories because he needs a bit of support?" And all this bollocks, and it just drains the creative process. Then they're constantly reminding you that it's a commercial enterprise that you're in. You're on board and not purely creative. And Tharg just says, "No, fuck all that. You're a creative person. I'm going to let you do that and not be worried about, I'm not going to force you to do this, that, or the other. Just do what you do best." It just makes so much sense, doesn't it? It's just one of those things. It's just bloody obvious, isn't it?
Well, with something like Megatropolis, is there ever a point where you felt actually I would like somebody to interfere in this? So please tell me what to do, or is it just that you had that freedom, you were able to go with it and do what you wanted with it? Because I'm assuming that on the series that Tharg had a light touch.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, I think because I understood, what was needed, and I've set these rules, and I'm going to stick with them, and because it is a commercial enterprise. We're doing this. We've all got careers. We have to feed our families, and so it has to be taken seriously. But it also has to be taken seriously for the fans' point of view, the reader's point of view. And I've wandered off again.
But it's with something like Megatropolis, were you just given free reign? Was there?
Sorry. Well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Matt doesn't interfere. I think if I did something appalling and that was just stupid or that just didn't work, he'd jump on it. But the script was so technically perfect. There were no questions. There were no grey areas. It was all very obvious what I was being asked to draw, and I could have possibly gone a bit more bonkers with it, but as I said earlier, I wanted it to be quite a serious book. Does that?
Yeah.
Am I getting any closer to answering?
Cool. So, in terms of views, we've already talked about Megatropolis, and is there anything you burningly want to do? Is there something that kind of sticks out? It's like that's what I'd like to focus on in the future, or are you happy with how things are?
I'm kind of I'm not really wanting or feeling the need to rock the boat at the moment. It feels. It feels great that I'm in this position. You know, as I've said before, it's a dream come true. And so, yeah, there are things that I maybe after Megatropolis 2, I might feel I want to branch out and maybe look at other characters, because I've always been very fond of Strontium Dog. Robo Hunter just blew my mind. I've spoken to Ian about that. It was an honor to meet him, and it's just great stuff. And I would love to do something original and maybe bring a character to the other than Judge Lamia that Ian Edgington and I did. But that's just a great thing to be able to do, to bring a character to a comic you love. So I really don't feel any great urge to push out at all, because the work I'm getting, the work Tharg's offering me is delightful. I've just finished a short Dredd with Ian Edgington, which is lovely, and I'm delighted with it. And before I start on Megatropolis 2, I'm working on another Dredd, another short. It's what more do you want? Well, I don't need anything more than that. That's great. I'm happy with that. Thank you.
That was great. Well, thank you very much indeed to Dave for chatting away. As always, fantastic to hear the inner workings of a strip like this. The collection of Megatropolis is available now from our web shop and apps, as well as all good book and comic book stores and online retailers. So do make sure you pick up a copy. We will be back in 2 weeks' time for more from the Galaxy's greatest podcast, promise. And until then, Earthlets, as always, Splundig Verthric.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the Galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com.